All right, well, we'll start out with a little bit of a review. We're in the last half of the book of Daniel, and these chapters, of course, are a series of dreams or visions that God gave Daniel regarding the future. Daniel's first dream was in chapter 7, and it resembles the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had back in chapter 2. Both of these dreams portrayed the four major Gentile kingdoms that would rule the earth until Christ returns at the end of the age of the Gentiles. These kingdoms were Babylon, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and Rome. At the end of the age, Christ will bring an end to these earthly kingdoms and establish his own kingdom on earth. We saw that King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 gave us man's view of these kingdoms. He saw a large statue made up of 4 different metals. They were shiny, beautiful, strong. They were powerful and worthy of admiration. Daniel's dream gave us God's perspective of these kingdoms. He saw 4 beasts coming out of the sea. They were ruthless animals that devoured their enemies. They were temporary, self-glorifying, and morally corrupt. Then Daniel saw the Ancient of Days come in purity to judge. He also saw a hideous beast with 10 horns representing 10 kings or rulers of a revived Roman Empire. One more horn will arise and become great. This is a picture of the Antichrist who will come at the end of the age. Then last week we started to look at Daniel's second dream. It also told of coming kingdoms as far as Daniel was concerned. This time the dream focused on 2 of the kingdoms, the Medo-Persians and the Greeks. And they were represented by a ram and by a goat. The ram had 2 horns signifying the Medes and the Persians, the 2 parts of the empire. The goat had a prominent horn which symbolized the first king of the Greeks, Alexander. And it said that the goat moved rapidly across the face of the earth, just as Alexander did in his conquests of the known world. Then it said that the goat trampled the ram, and this foretold Greece quickly dispensing the Persian Empire. Then the horn was broken off, so Alexander the Great died, and he was replaced by 4 little horns, and these represented the 4 generals that were under him. Lysimachus took the north, which was Thrace and parts of Asia Minor. Cassander took the west, which was Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy took the south, primarily Egypt. And then Seleucus took the east, which is the largest landmass of the split-up empire. The detail and accuracy of the prophecy is really astounding, and it's caused many skeptics to challenge the authorship and the dating of the book of Daniel. But God's word stands. We made one final observation, and that was that God used the spread of the Greek Empire for his purposes. The adoption of the Greek language and Greek culture made the world ready to receive the coming of Jesus and for his gospel to spread more rapidly through the world. Well, tonight we continue to unravel chapter 8 and the future events that it foretells. And then just quickly one look at our timeline here. The first 6 chapters of Daniel laid out in chronological order. And then we saw that chapter 7 came back here before the end of the Babylonian Empire, but after Nebuchadnezzar has died, because at this point, Belshazzar is the king, where he has the vision of the 4 beasts coming out of the sea. And then tonight in chapter 8 is just a couple years later. It's in the 3rd year of Belshazzar. And still, again, before the fall of Babylon. So it's probably in the 550, 545-ish time frame, BC. Okay. Well, let's take a look at our scriptures tonight. And as usual, if you note down any important words or phrases here, we'll make note of those in our overview. So Daniel 8, I'm going to begin, I'm going to back up one verse. We'll begin in verse 8 and read to the end of the chapter. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, "Gabriel, make this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, "Understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end." And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. Okay, so what were some words there that were important in that passage?
We've seen a lot of the word vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Time of the end.
Time of the end, yeah. There are a couple of variations of that, yeah. Anything else?
Prince of Princess.
I'm sorry?
Prince of Princess.
Mm-hmm.
Seal up the vision.
Okay, good. Power?
His power will be great, but not by his own power.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Something other than human power involved, right. Okay. Well, Alexander's Greek Empire was divided to his 4 generals, as we said. And they're represented in verse 8 by the 4 horns that emerged after the one prominent horn was broken off. Verse 9 tells us that a little horn came out of one of the 4 horns. This can be confusing at first because it sounds a lot like what was described in Daniel's earlier dream. Somebody has Daniel 7, verses 7 to 8. Remember what that was.
After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
So these 2 little horns might at first seem like they're talking about the same thing and the same person, but they're not. The horn in Daniel 7 emerges from the 4th beast. The horn in, which was, as we said before, which was Rome, or specifically a revived Roman Empire that will come in the last days. But the horn here in Daniel 8 emerges from the 3rd empire, which was Greece, after its dissolution into the 4 pieces that the 4 generals take over. So here's a table that kind of compares these 2 horns, just so that we're clear that there is a distinction between them. The little horn in Daniel 7 comes from this 4th kingdom, this revived Roman Empire, whereas the one in Daniel 8 comes from the 3rd kingdom, which is Greece, after Alexander's time. The horn in Daniel 7 comes as after the 10 horns, or so it's like an 11th horn. It ends up overtaking 3 of the horns and becomes greater than all. But the one here in Daniel 8 comes out of one of the 4 horns, so it's a 5th horn, and it's coming out of Greece. The time that they are having power is different. The little horn in Daniel 7 is time times and half a time, or 3.5 years. And here in Daniel 8, we see 2,300 evenings and mornings, which is about a little over 6 years. And then the Messianic kingdom follows the destruction of the horn in Daniel 7, but that's not the case in Daniel 8. So Daniel 7 is pointing to the Antichrist later in time, and Daniel 8 has a more immediate application that we'll talk about. So some other translations are a little more helpful here because, for example, the New American Standard says, and out of one of them came a rather small horn. So this idea of a rather small horn is a little more distinctive than just saying the small horn. So it helps to separate these 2 horns. And I'll probably refer to him a lot as the rather small horn, and that's this one that's happening here in chapter 8. But there is a relationship between these 2 horns. We'll see that as we go on tonight. The rather small horn that's coming out of the divided Greek Empire here in Daniel 8 is really a prototype or a forerunner of this horn in Daniel 7 that will emerge in the last days. Well, verse 9 also tells us that the horn started out small. The Hebrew word used here for small indicates something insignificant. It's used by Saul when Samuel came around to anoint him king over Israel. We read about that in 1 Samuel 9, 17 to 21.
Samuel saw Saul, who Lord told him, "Here is the man whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people." Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, "Tell me, where is the house of the seer?" Samuel answered, "Saul, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, For today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go, and will tell you all that is on your mind. As for your donkeys, they were lost 3 days ago. Do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house? Saul answered, I am not a Benjamite. I am not a Benjamite, but the least of the tribe. I gotta get this right. Am I not a Benjamite, the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way?
So we see the same word, the same idea here as Saul expresses to Samuel how insignificant he is, and he's surprised that this anointing might be coming his way. So in the same way, this horn here in Daniel 8 starts out in an insignificant way, and we read that it's going to grow in power and grow in its conquests. It says it will grow exceedingly great toward the south, the east, and the beautiful land. And as we look at where that Seleucid Empire was, that's the direction that it's going to take off. The beautiful land here, or I think in the ESV is said a little bit differently. It called it the glorious land. This idea of the beautiful land, of course, is a reference to Palestine, to Israel, specifically Jerusalem. We read about this in Psalm 48, 1 through 3.
Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all earth. Mount Zion in the far north, the city of the great King. Within her citadels, God has made himself known as a fortress. For behold, the kings assembled, they came on together. As soon as they saw it, they were astounded. They were in panic. They took to flight.
And of course, it isn't just the, oh, sorry.
One more. No, that's it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I read one more verse.
And it's not just the geography that makes it beautiful. It's beautiful because that's where God is going to reveal the beautiful story of his redemption, Christ on Calvary. It's also the place where he will establish the throne of Christ, the King, in the millennium. And we read about that in Micah 4, 1 and 2.
It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains. And it shall be lifted up above the hills, and people shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.
So the throne of Christ and the millennial kingdom being established in this beautiful land. And finally, Zechariah 14:4.
On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives. It lies before Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mountain shall move northward and the other half southward.
Well, last week we took some time to review some of the history of Persia and Greece, and that helped us see how these prophecies of Daniel were clearly fulfilled through those two empires. Well, again, this week we're going to take a look at some history, and we're going to see how this prophecy given to Daniel came true. And as often the case, there's a typology or a foreshadowing of the future events in his dreams. So there's a more near-term fulfillment that we're going to see, as well as a longer-term fulfillment. We talked about Alexander's 4 generals. One of them was Seleucus, and he took control of the eastern part of the Greek Empire. The new Seleucid Empire comprised the greatest landmass of this divided Greece. and it extended from the Mediterranean Sea to the borders of India. They were centered, however, in Syria, and Antioch was the capital for most of their existence. And here's a map just as kind of a reminder, that gray area there and the adjoining kind of orangish area there, that's all part of the Seleucid Empire. So it ran from parts of Asia Minor and the Mediterranean Sea all the way across the Middle East and over to the Indus River bordering India. So very expansive. So that's the area that is being referred to here. Well, in this new Seleucid Empire, Seleucus obviously was the first king, but then the 8th king of the Seleucid Empire was a guy named Antiochus, and he was Antiochus IV. He took on the title Epiphanes, which means manifest or conspicuous or illustrious. He was very proud of himself. He was a Macedonian by descent. His father was Antiochus III, who also became known as Antiochus the Great. And he attempted to expand the Seleucid Empire into Greece. But when he did that, the Roman Republic stopped him. They rebuffed him, and as a punishment, they forced him to pay an annual tribute to Rome. And another part of the punishment was he had to send some of his family members to Rome to be hostages. Well, he sent one of his sons, Antiochus IV, to go to Rome, because you see, Antiochus was the third born. So he's not immediately in line for the throne. He's got a brother who's in line for the throne. He's got 2 brothers that are before him. So his father says, okay, I've got to send a hostage. You're the one. So he sends him to Rome. And he's there for a good part of his childhood and young life. Well, when his father, Antiochus the Great, dies, the firstborn son, Seleucus Philopator, becomes king, as we would expect. So at that time, the Philopator sent one of his sons to Rome and allowed Antiochus to return from Rome. Shortly after that, Philopator dies. He's assassinated by one of his treasurers, and Antiochus Epiphanes sees an opportunity for him to seize power. So he heads back to Syria, back to Antioch, and he seizes the throne for himself in 175 BC. He had a couple of coins, some coins minted with of himself on the coin, of course, and the inscription on there reads, Antiochus, image of God, bearer of victory. Had a pretty high idea of himself. Antiochus Epiphanes is singled out here in Daniel as a warning to the Jews. He was an anti-Semite who would treat Jews in an evil manner. He would oppose God's temple in Jerusalem, and he would attempt to get rid of the scriptures. He assaulted Jerusalem and murdered 40,000 Jews in 3 days. He sent a similar number of them into slavery. He attempted 2 campaigns to extend his empire into Egypt. It is said that during the second campaign, the Roman ambassador to Egypt, Popilius Lanus, took his sword and drew a circle around Antiochus on the ground, and he demanded of him, if you don't withdraw from here immediately, you're going to face war with Rome. And we think that's where our phrase, drawing a line in the sand, comes from. Well, verse 10 says that this rather small horn grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the host were thrown down and trampled. The Hebrew word here for host is a military term. Sometimes it's used for armies. So we shouldn't think that it's talking about angels here. It's referring to, probably referring to the Jews. In this context, we should understand it that way. And we see in other places that God refers to his people with this term, host. One example is in Exodus 7, verse 4.
Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt, by great acts of judgment.
So we see that God does refer to his people as his host, and that's what's happening here. And the stars it talks about falling is probably a reference to the Jewish leaders that are falling too. In verse 11, we read that this rather small horn equates himself with God. And indeed, Antiochus adopted titles. One was Theos Epiphanes, which means God manifest. And he had another one called Nikephoros, which means bearer of victory. And just as a kind of a side note here, while he calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes, the Jews mocked him and they called him Antiochus Epimanes, M-A-N-E-S, Epimanes. And the word Epimanes, it sounds like Epiphanes, so it was kind of a clever play on words there. But Epimanes means the madman. So the Jews mockingly referred to him as the madman, and it was an appropriate title. The morning and the evening sacrifices would be removed and the temple thrown down. And that's exactly what Antiochus did. He replaced the worship of God with the worship of Zeus. He built many pagan altars, and he halted the morning and evening sacrifices in the temple. The ultimate low point was in December of 168 BC. At that time, Antiochus sacrificed a pig on the altar in the temple. He then forced the Jewish priests to swallow the flesh. He made a broth out of it, and he sprinkled the entire temple with the abominable broth. He carried off the golden candlesticks, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and various other vessels, and he destroyed the sacred books of the law. The horrified Jews referred to this as the abomination that causes desolation, and Daniel will use that very phrase later in chapter 11 of his book. This phrase means that the temple was desolate of pious Jews because the altar had been desecrated. They had no desire to worship in that polluted environment. So the abomination of Antiochus caused the temple to be desolate of true worshipers. Many of the Jews were forced, or some were persuaded, that they should abandon the law and the covenant that they had with God. Those who stood true and failed to obey the orders of Antiochus were mercilessly slaughtered. Thus, we have references in both verses 10 and in verse 12 to being trampled and others being given over to the ways of the rather small horn. So that was the case with Antiochus. So you had two options. You conformed to his way and what he wanted, abandoning the law, or you were executed. The book of Maccabees is a part of the Apocrypha, and we don't recognize it as scripture, but it does provide some valuable historical information about this period of Jewish history. It tells us that evil men influenced Israel to make alliances with the Gentiles. They said, "Since we separated from them, many evils have come upon us." Well, many Jews found that this was agreeable. So they abandoned the Holy Covenant. By covering the mark of their circumcision, they sacrificed to idols, and they profaned the Sabbath. Verse 12 also says that he will throw truth to the ground. And Antiochus did this because he forbade the reading of the Old Testament scriptures, and he would execute those who broke his decree. Well, we see there's an angel witnessing all this, ask how long this terror will continue. And despite this time of horror, God still remains in control. And this rather small horn would prevail only for a prescribed period of time. In this case, he was allotted 2,300 evenings and mornings. And that phrasing there sounds a lot like Genesis, doesn't it? Where the evening and the morning made the next day. Well, Antiochus set up altars to Zeus throughout the land of Israel, and he forced the Jews to offer sacrifices on them. There was a small town called Modin. It's still around. It exists 17 miles northwest of Jerusalem. And in that town, there was a priest named Mattathias. He lived there with his 5 sons. They refused to worship to idols per Antiochus's decree. And not only that, they slew the king's religious ambassador that was sent to them. Well, the Jewish revolt was on. One of this priest's sons was named Judas, and he was called Maccabeus, which means the hammer. They called him Judas the Hammer. Well, this Judas gathered troops, he gathered the loyal Jews together, and he led the fight against the Syrians for the next few years. Then on December 25th in 164 BC, these patriotic Jews reclaimed the temple in Jerusalem. They cleansed and rededicated the temple. And that's when there was this one-day supply of oil that miraculously lasted for 8 days. This cleansing became the Jewish Feast of Dedication. And we see that Jesus observed this feast too. Somebody has John 10, 22 through 28.
At that time, the feast of dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." Jesus answered them, "I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe because you are not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand."
So the day, the Feast of Dedication celebrates this cleansing of the temple during the time of Judas Maccabeus. That marks the end of the rather small horn's 2,300-day reign, which began some 6 years earlier in his persecution of the Jews. Well, this Feast of Dedication is still around today. We know it by the name Hanukkah. Jews continue to celebrate it. And as a bit of a funny side note, Donald Campbell, who was the former president of Dallas Seminary, told a story about a Jew who was in Russia during the time of great persecution. And one of the persecutors said to this old Jew, "What do you think is going to happen if this wave of persecution continues?" And the Jew answered, "Well, there will be a feast. Pharaoh tried to destroy the Jews, but the result was Passover. Haman tried to destroy the Jews, but the result was the Feast of Purim. Antiochus Epiphanes tried to destroy the Jews, but the result was the Feast of Dedication." So this might make us chuckle a little bit, but really more to the point, we see God's deliverance taking place in each of these cases where he watched over his children and brought them out of some dire circumstances. We see then Daniel's confused by what he just saw, and yet he wanted to understand it. Here again, we see this word. We're told to behold, so we know something important is coming up here. We're told to wake up and pay attention as something important's about to happen. Next to Daniel was someone that looked like a man, it says. It was the angel Gabriel, we find out. And a voice called out to Gabriel. That's God's voice. God is instructing Gabriel to reveal the meaning of the dream to Daniel. And Daniel reacts as we often see mortal men react when they encounter the supernatural. He's frightened and he falls on his face. We see other examples of this in Scripture in Joshua 5:13 to 15.
When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so.
And another example of this is in Numbers 16, 20 to 21.
And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with all the congregation?
So those are just a couple examples. There are many more that I'm sure that you could think of in cases where an angel appears to man and the man is overcome and falls down. Well, Gabriel explained that this vision was for the time of the end. Some will take a historical view of this statement. They say that everything in this chapter has been fulfilled. Others take a futuristic version and say that all of this chapter is yet future. But there's a third position that says what we read here in Daniel 8 has been fulfilled in the person of Antiochus Epiphanes, but he is also a type of the Antichrist that is to come. So there is a dual fulfillment, if you will, or a foreshadowing of more that is coming. There's more intended here. And I think that's the correct way to look at this chapter in Daniel. It is fulfilled historically. We can look back and we can confirm that as we look at the history of Antiochus Epiphanes. And yet there's some things here that clearly point to a time in the future. And Gabriel's going to give us a hint about that here in just a little bit. In verse 18, we see that Daniel sinks into a deep sleep with his face to the ground. Gabriel touched him and made him stand up. And we have a similar reaction on the part of John. We see this in Revelation 1, 17 to 18.
When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, fear not, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades.
Okay, so similar interaction there with John as what Gabriel's having with Daniel. Well, now it's the angel's turn to say, behold. We see behold again. In verse 19, the angel says that he will let Daniel know what will happen at the latter end of the indignation. The Hebrew word here means that the end of a period of time or the last time. It's frequently used to refer to events at the end of the age of the Gentiles, such as the tribulation or the millennial kingdom. We see this in Isaiah 2 through 4.
As a lily among the branches, so is my love among the young. Oh, sorry. Wrong one. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.
And then one more instance of this use of this phrase of the latter time, the end of a period of time, is in Jeremiah 31 through 34.
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor, and each his brother, say, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more.
Isaiah and Jeremiah both talking about things occurring in the future in the millennial kingdom. So Gabriel's words here are an indication that this dream has a near-term fulfillment, and that near-term fulfillment is a foreshadowing of future events. This rather small horn was a type of the coming Antichrist. In verses 20 through 22, Gabriel gives the identities of the characters in Daniel's dream. We saw this last week. The ram was Persia, the goat is Greece. The large horn was the first king of Greece, and we know now that was Alexander. The four horns were the four kingdoms that would arise after the death of the king, and we know those are the four generals of Alexander who took over and split up the kingdom. And then in verses 23 and 24, it says that in the latter time of these kingdoms of the four horns, one will arise with great power. But it's not his own power. So even as evil runs rampant, God is still in control. He will destroy mighty men, and many saints will be destroyed too. This is a reference to the faithful Old Testament Jews. Antiochus fulfilled this prophecy as he executed many Jews. Well, then as we look at verse 25, it continues explaining the prophecy. This king will be cunning, deceitful, great in his own mind. He will even rise up against the Prince of Princes. And here again we see the dual nature of this prophecy. In one sense, this is Antiochus. He has a high opinion of himself. He's cunning, he's deceitful, he's great in his own mind. And he does rise up against the Prince of Princes, which is a messianic term. He does rise up against Messiah in the sense that he desecrated the temple. He made the reading of scriptures a capital crime, and he tried to eliminate the Jewish people, not in the sense that he has a direct conflict with the Prince of Princes. That's going to come later with the Antichrist. Antiochus was a type or a foreshadow of the Antichrist to come. We read about this Antichrist in Revelation 13, verses 5 through 8.
And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to it over every tribe of people and language and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain.
So some of those descriptions there sound like Antiochus, but others go beyond that. This Antichrist's abomination that makes desolate was a sample, Antiochus's abomination that makes desolate was a sample of what the Antichrist will do. We read about this, Paul writes of it in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 4.
For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not to please man, but to please God who tests our heart.
Did I give you the wrong reference? That doesn't sound right.
No, it's just my mistake.
Oh, okay.
I read 1 Thessalonians instead of 2.
Okay.
Yes, that's 2, 3. Let no one deceive you in any way, but that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God.
Well, the Antichrist will be even more blatant than what we saw with Antiochus. He'll command worship of himself and the image of the beast. We see that in Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15.
And by the signs that it is about to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain.
So even during this terrible time to come, God's allowing this to happen too as a part of his plans, a part of the purging and purifying of the nation of Israel. Verse 26, we see Gabriel tells Daniel to seal up the vision and keep it for the future. God gave this vision of coming events to Daniel that it might be a comfort and an encouragement when the time came for it to be fulfilled. So they would have this vision to encourage them at Antiochus' time. They might take heart because they would know there's a limit to his evil reign. It's only going to be 2,300 days. It will come to an end. In the same way, we're to be encouraged as we read of the terrible destruction coming on the earth at the end of the age. God is sovereign over all these events, and he's weaving them together for his purposes. Well, finally, we see that all of this has exhausted Daniel. He was sick for days after this vision. But in time, he got up and he went about the king's business. He was appalled and did not understand all that he witnessed. But he moved forward in faith, believing that God was in control and that God would bring his will to fruition. So there's not a lot of art surrounding this, but there's one famous piece here I wanted to show you. This is called Daniel's Vision, and it's Rembrandt. And I'll magnify part of this here. So the light and the real focal point here is on the angel and on Daniel. And we see some of the empathy and the feeling in their faces. And then over here we see the goat and other things going on over there. That's a much darker part of the picture. I tried to look and see if there was maybe the remains of the ram there. I'm not sure if that's what's happening or not, but there's Rembrandt's idea of Daniel's vision.
We would believe that Daniel's not a young man in this vision.
Right, yeah. Daniel's in his late 60s, probably getting close to 70, yeah. So that part of it's not accurate. Well, let's have a couple questions and a little discussion about this. What do we see about God tonight out of this passage?
I would say God works in mysterious ways, right?
Yeah.
But he's still in control.
Yes,
And there's
always in
time
control.
limits.
Yeah, we don't understand it. We will never understand it.
One of the themes of Daniel 2 is God who sets up kings and brings their downfall. So even someone as terrible as this man, Antiochus, he's still, nevertheless, was raised up by God for his reasons and also deposed for his reasons according to his time, and same for Satan as well. So maybe it's hard sometimes to understand exactly why, in the sense of, I get all the time, well, why doesn't God just shut, Satan down immediately from the get-go? Well, that's a little bit hard necessarily to go way back to that, but at least we can say, well, we have plenty of examples of God raising up evil people for his purposes and then knocking them down for his purposes. And it's certainly going to be true of Satan.
Even when God sent the Jews into Egypt, he said there's going to be 400 years of captivity because the Ammonites are not ready. So he was giving them time for salvation, which they rejected. So it was an aspect of God's working through history and offering his free will, his gift to man, and giving us time to accept or reject his gift of salvation.
Well, then the second question, I don't have on a slide, but it's on the bottom of your handout. How can we apply the lessons from Daniel 8 to trust God's control and wisdom in our own lives and the challenges we face today?
I like the conclusion that even though Daniel was exhausted and appalled, he rested and he went back to work.
Yeah.
And he didn't understand it even either. And so Daniel didn't understand some of these things, but could still trust the Lord, go about his business, and maybe if I don't necessarily understand everything about everything God does all the time, well, maybe I get all tore up and, there's plenty of folks that I can think of that are just wish that God would just give them a clear answer, but there's a lot of mystery at the moment, even making them sick, but you can still trust. I mean, he's even given the answer. He's given all the answers pretty explicitly. He still say
He's still confused.
Yeah.
He still says, I don't get it.
yeah. And
Well, we have the benefit of looking back historically and being able to see it. We have that advantage. But still, he's been given a lot of explanation here, and he still says he doesn't get it. But that doesn't stop, and that's the point. It doesn't
even if
stop.
God were to tell you explicitly about what's going to happen, not to make it too personal, but if God told me who I was going to marry even, or that I'd be a pastor at a church back when I was in high school or something, to know it would probably make me a little sick in a sense. Like, you're going to tell me I'm going to have 5 kids and at this church I've never been to, and what does that mean? And I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to be there. I'm not ready for that, or I can't fathom that. I can imagine being sick at something, even if it was explicitly told me, that still didn't make sense really, because there's no, not a context for it back in high school. So I mean, it's very understandable and relatable. So maybe God's keeping you in the dark for a reason, sparing you a tummy ache and some sleepless nights by just saying, you know what? How about you just trust me? Because even if I told you, you didn't even understand it. Right? Is it even going to make you feel better about it if I did tell you explicitly everything that's going to go on? So why not just take today, take the gift of today, be faithful today, and let tomorrow worry about itself.
Hebrews tells us if it's not unseen, it's not faith. We hear him say it differently.
And of course, a lot of his sickness, his angst here is for his people. This is a terrible prophecy of what's awaiting his people. It breaks his heart to hear that.
I've been thinking, because you've been teaching us about God setting aside and saving the Gentiles. And I'm sure that the Jewish people back then were looking at it the same way, going, I don't get it. And then you read Romans 10 and 11, and it explains God is doing this because I want to make you jealous. I want you to come home. And it's just, we don't know God's ways, but he has a plan. He has, and for that one, we're all really, really grateful.
Even in Daniel, it doesn't say the vision is about the end of time. It says the vision is for the end of time. Verse
17?
17. Daniel only knew about the Medes and the Persians and the Babylonians. As far as he was concerned, the Greek, they were,
They were a couple hundred years away. He couldn't, and this guy, Antiochus, have I been pronouncing, is it Antiochus? Have I been pronouncing it wrong?
I kind of like your way, but I grew up, I don't know, I just always heard Antiochus. But
I should have looked it up in the dictionary to figure out the correct pronunciation.
Right, and then you pronounce it more like Antioch.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So-
I think I like your way. I think it has more to do with Antioch than like anti-something.
That's how I took it, yeah.
Like anti-Christ. I just think Antiochus, but I think you're right. So I don't know.
Okay, well,
But you were saying.
I was saying, yeah, what was I saying?
So also some prophecies is partially about the beast. Yeah, the beast it will come in the end of days and it will require worship.
Right, yeah. Like,
So maybe artificial intelligence, like. So,
I think that might figure in maybe. It's hard.
It could, yeah. Okay.
Well, I think you're saying that Antiochus was future even to the.
Oh, yeah. So he's probably almost 400 years after Daniel. So, yeah. So
in
it's
context, he couldn't imagine anybody more powerful than the Persians. I mean, they had just slaughtered the Babylonians, and he's looking around, there's nobody else like these guys. They're the big dog on the wall.
well, yeah, and at this time Babylon was still in power, but Persia was around. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to realize, oh yeah, those Medes and Persians, they could do something. But beyond that, he had no clue. Okay, well, thanks for some good discussion.